Nicole Finzer is Digital Projects and Outreach Librarian at Northwestern University in Illinois. So, Nicole, I'm going to ask you. Okay, I can see your slides. It looks great.
Great. Thank you, Jill.
This microphone's yours.
All right. Thank you, first off, for having me. I'm going to speak on a project that took roughly 4 years at Northwestern University. And I titled this talk, Reviving the Revival, the Digitization of the Berkeley Folk and Music Festival. I just wanted to start by acknowledging the lands that Northwestern sits on, the Council of the Three Fires. And now I would like to give a bit of history on this collection, so you have a sense of why California Berkeley collection is in Chicago, Illinois. So snippets of this history are from the curator, Scott Kraft, who was involved with the purchase. And so that's a spoiler. The Berkeley Folk and Music Festival took place from 1958 through 1970 on the campus of the University of California, Berkeley. Multi-day long festival made up use of a wide range of outdoor as well as indoor campus spaces. The largest venue was the Hearst Brake Theater, seen here in this photo with blues legend Mississippi John Hurt in 1964. Many of these venues did not exist and had to be added to NACO. So here are some examples: the Ash Grove venue, Berkeley Community Theater, plus all the years of this multi-year event. By contrast to these big concerts, the festivals included more intimate settings. Here on the left, we see Mississippi John, and on the right, we see Pete Seeger performing in the woods on campus. And then the festival used classrooms for lectures and panel discussions about folk music. And so like we see in this photo, singer-musician Sam Hinton addressing a group in 1964. And seated in the front row of this audience is a young Jerry Garcia. So there's a close-up view on the right of him, who would soon become the founding member of the Grateful Dead. So the festival used classroom, oops, I'm sorry, wrong slide. The festival offered workshop hosted by performers. Here we see one hosted by Doc Watson, John Cohen, Mississippi John, and Alice Stewart. And then here's a glimpse of the varied performers. Now, this is not all of them by any means from the many years, but many of the performers had to be added to NACO. Some examples, again, of performers that were not in NACO are Country Joe and the Fish, Three Sisters Musical Group, Circus Maximus, Brotherly Love, and the Andrew Gospel Singers. Now, the obvious question, which I gave a spoiler on earlier, was why is this archive not at Berkeley? And the answer is that Northwestern University's libraries bought it in the 1980s from Barry Olivier. He approached the head of our special collections. And since our collecting focus is the long 60s, it fit perfectly with that. And just of note, on the left is one of the few color photos we have. The bulk of the photography is black and white. So this is Barry Olivier. The festival was a creation of him. He attended the University of California at Berkeley for a few years, and he came up with the idea, and the university allowed him to host it, which for me personally, I think it's hard to imagine just approaching a university and using the land as he did for this event. Now, this is where we enter the rationale for digitizing this massive collection. In 2009, the history professor, Dr. Michael Kramer at Northwestern University, discovered the archive. He would come by the reading room and look at our long 60s materials, and no one had really been using this collection. So here's a photo of Dr. Kramer and Barry Olivier. They brought him to campus, he spoke to the classes, and you see one of Michael's or Dr. Kramer's books in this slide. So this is what kicked off this digitization project. Now, his course was Digitizing Folk Music History. So it was a digital humanities angled course. teaching students how to use archival materials for digital storytelling and projects. So in 2011, he designed this entire course around the Berkeley Folk Music Festival, and he taught it for several years. And the class had a focus on digital projects, as I mentioned, and here are two examples. So we have one about typography, and another was about the musician Alice Stewart. So this is where the department I work in, repository and digital curation, comes on this in the picture. So we had been doing random one-offs for his students for those years when it was more of an ad hoc project. And then in 2011, it ramped up and there was identified a need to really do the whole collection. So this is just a grab from our webpage with all our details, and I'll share it at the end of the talk. So in 2015, we applied for a grant through the NEH. It was written by Dr. Kramer and our digital humanities librarian, Josh Hahn, and we got the money. So all I knew when this project dropped, well, when it was written, was that I was going to be the project manager if we got the money. Beyond that, I skimmed it, didn't pay much attention, and just thought, well, I'd have to figure it out if we receive the grant. And we obviously did. So some of the processes or the process and challenges that had to be overcome from a project manager perspective, which would be mine, was basically reading over the grant and figuring out what we had committed to. And so in the first page, it said digitize the entirety of the collection and add it to our repository. These are two screen grabs showing how we did do the entire collection. We had scraps and pieces at the bottom of folders and boxes that may or may not have matched up with something, obviously, but I made the decision that we just capture all of it. So you could piece, let's say, this newspaper clipping together later, or find the envelope that goes with this address. If you peruse the collection, you will see there are many duplicates. We must have, I think Barry Olivier, Joan Baez was his favorite. He kept multiple copies of her posters. And here's just a one-page grab from our repository of the July 24th poster that he kept. And so, you know, he collected these duplicates. We bought this collection. So, and in the grant, it said, we're going to scan all of it. So I talked to the curator, who told me he did not have time to pick the best image of the, let's say, 50 Joan Baez posters. And for the sake of time, since we had 3 years to get it done and spend the money, I decided we would do all of it. So we had our student workers and other staff inventory and capture everything. Now, there's a ton of clippings in here. And these were another area that we had to do a lot of NACO heading work. So when you get into the collection, a lot of those headings you see were results of this project. And here's just a few that I grabbed, again, showing scraps, cutouts. So the deliverables stated in the grant were what you see here. So this is what I thought we were working with. And I had honestly not touched the physical items before we got moving on this, and I was overseeing the project. So I thought we had roughly 36,000 items to capture, 9 3D objects. So you see 3 of the buttons here. And then I thought there was a lot of photography. It turned out there was a lot more than photography in here. So the year 1 work plan, which the authors of the grant put together, and I had to change a little bit from year to year. This is a screen grab of what they committed us to. And there was a lot to get done in 12 months. And when I say they said go, it was go time. And so just at a glance, you can see any number of steps that I had to manage and see through. Now, it's worth noting the NEH versus NUL funding in this. The NEH funded 2 full-time metadata assistants. So that's what the money went for from the NEH. NUL committed to paying for all the vendor digitization work, all the additional staff that you'll learn about later, and all the supplies, because although it was stated the collection was stable, we had to do a lot of rehousing and additional work that required additional cardboard boxes, folders, you name it, Mylar. Our preservation department was not mentioned in the grant. It was stated that it was fine. We could just run and digitize it. As soon as I got in there, it became clear quickly that we needed the preservation department. So here's a shot of two of our preservation folks, Tanya and Susan, working on a handbill and posters. You can see folded items on the right, and then one of the flattened ones in the middle. So we created this whole workflow for getting all this stuff between departments before it ever was shipped out to a vendor. Year two, here's a glimpse of what had to happen. We had so much preservation work to do, a temp had to be hired. So, I mean, I would consider this project kind of a money pit, we got it done. And so at this point, in the second year, the vendor work ended, the shipping ended, the preservation ended, and it was just by the end of the year, just full steam ahead with all the metadata. And I wanted to give credit to our vendor. We use Backstage Library Works. All these boxes were shipped to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Here's a glimpse of their facility, though they're not digitizing Berkeley Folk Festival materials. And then year three. So this is the final year. And we were ingesting material. Both of the metadata temps, their terms ended. And we had to get the digital exhibit launched. It was mentioned in the grant that we were going to catalog and ingest the audio files and the video files we had. So I had to figure out where they were. They were digitized like 5 years prior to this. And so they are now in our repository as of this month, because before that you had to view images and audio video separately, but now it's all in there together. So when you go to this collection, you will see the audio files, the video files, and then all this ephemera. It all is in there together. And here we have on the left a tape of an audition Barry did with the Diesel Ducks. And then on the right, we have a recording of a broadcast of the 1968 festival with the KPFA. And our repository, these images are in there. So we've also made an effort to show the housing, because Dr. Kramer needed it for some of his digital humanities projects and additional work that he's doing with this material. Here is everything, a lot more than photography, that was captured and is now available online. And for me, through this process of being so closely involved with this collection for so long, I really found all of the textual stuff interesting, all of the sales of records and payments to musicians. One of my colleagues has spoken at a class about the discrepancies between the male and the female musicians and their payments. Like, this sort of stuff is fascinating to dig in and find in here. So it goes well beyond the photography. In numbers, so we had 61 boxes, we shipped 59 out. It was roughly, I decided like 5 boxes a month we could handle shipping. We had to do 2 in-house because they were oversized. And when talking with the preservation department, they felt that the overhead on figuring out how to wrap up and ship large folders of posters and boxes of posters just wasn't worth it. So we did all that in-house. The grant said we were going to do it off-site, but it was in-site. And then the original count was 36,000 items. And by the end of it, we had well over 45,000, and we did recto verso. So it was 90,000 files by the end of this, so 90,000 plus. And just a sense of authority terms and NACO work that happened. You can see the numbers here. And then Dr. Kramer, it was the first year of the pandemic. So it went a little over our deadline, but he, working with Scott Kraft, our curator, created the digital exhibit. Again, I'll share the URL. And there were many, I think 5 essays using all the materials. And it's a great digital exhibit. And I should mention, Dr. Kramer is no longer at Northwestern. He's now at SUNY in Brockport. So during the pandemic, we discovered this collection was used a lot. And he was able to finish his essay, do a lot of research, apply for another grant, do any number of things from many states away. But here's all the staff it took to get it done, a lot more than 2 metadata attempts. So we had 27 people when it was all said and done, working on this to see it through at different stages. Obviously, the preservation staff fell off when that work was done. I was with the project the whole way through. Like the NACO team, when the metadata was finished, they rolled off. But it was a huge endeavor. And here you see one of the graduate students that worked with me on inventorying, and then our collections assistant who was shuttling all the boxes around as we were moving them between departments. So an unspoken thing that happened during this project was we had 4 developers overhauling our repository and making it more robust for big ingests, because this was a big collection. It was the biggest thing we'd ingested. So this is we call it Meadow. It's our backend tool. It's our DAM. You're seeing a view of the collection where I can go in as a collection manager and update the description if Dr. Kramer wants the wordage changed. The total number of works ticks up as more are added. We edit metadata in here. It's Sam Vera, if anyone's curious. And then, oh, where's my slide? Okay, there we are. And then here we have the front end. So this is what you'll see. And this is the public view. The whole collection's public, where all the images are available. And you can see the blurb that I just showed you at the back end now is at the front end. And IIIF for the audio, video, and images. I know Michael's or Dr. Kramer's been playing with that. I don't know beyond that who else has been doing IIIF stuff with this, but this is our front end. And then again, going back to the Meadow, we can at a glance see our usage statistics. And here it's our 3rd most used collection. And at the bottom, it's tiny, but you can kind of see where these images are being picked up. So Google is our #1 way people are finding the collection, which you'll understand why in one of my future slides. And then we've got a lot of Michael Kramer stuff going on. He's pushing them to Facebook, Instagram, his classes. So the images are being picked up a lot by Dr. Kramer's efforts. So our devs did the search engine optimization that allows for just putting Berkeley Folk Music Archive in Google and, well, in Northwestern, and having it come up. So here's to grab at the first row of what you will find. But these thousands of images now are the first thing you'll hit. And we also linked data to the rightstatement.org and all the subject headings. And so that was work that happened during the pandemic, post-grant. And the final report went to the NEH in 2020, and Carolyn Casey and I authored it, and here's how it ended. And we met our requirement of 36,000. And then our next steps are Professor Kramer, Dr. Kramer, continues to use all the content. We had Linda Ostern, a musicology professor, pick it up during the pandemic, and she's teaching women in rock, music revivals, and performers and performance. Updating the finding aid, it used to be a 36-page PDF. We now have it all in archive space, link data out to all of the work that was done with the metadata team, even linking to the images. So that's a wonderful bonus that came of this work. And then we've had random people email us, like Janice Ian in the middle. A fan found her images when they were Googling her name, and then she reached out and said, hey, what's going on here? So we've had those random what next of interacting with the musicians. And then Dr. Kramer, you can see here, here's 2 grabs from his page that I'll send you the link to. He's now teaching digital humanities courses and research with the archives. And he received an award for his digital exhibit. And then he got a second NEH grant for $30,000. And so that started, I think, this year to create essays, audio podcasts, and then he's going to curate the exhibit, I think, in Omeka. And that is my talk. So I'm ending with Christmas cards because I have a background in printmaking and I love graphic materials. And there's a ton of neat looking Christmas cards, who would have thought, in this collection. So here are 2 of them, and then just a neat business card that I stumbled upon. So thank you. I can take any questions.
That's a remarkable collection to work with, Nicole. I really think just the range of essentially very ephemeral types of content, it must have been fascinating to inventory, although I also imagine it was quite challenging to develop the workflow to push it through. I want to encourage our attendees to submit their questions in the Q&A panel. But while they're doing that, I want to ask specifically, you referenced, and I hope I haven't muddled this, I think you referenced the use of 6,500 authority terms that were assigned to the different elements.
Yeah.
Did you have to develop a new set of controlled vocabulary, or was this, or were these terms already in place?
So all of the NACO terms I referenced were new ones, and we have, I want to say there's like 9 Northwestern metadata staff that are authorized to submit and create them. So they were liaising with our metadata person in RDC and the temps to get that work done. So it's surprisingly, a lot of the musicians and a lot of the locations in this collection just weren't there. So yeah, they were created anew through our NACO authority work.
And the other thing that struck me was you said this was the 3rd most used collection there at Northwestern. And I'm curious to know, what was the range of countries that were, I mean, do you have a sense of?
I could, if I stop
be?
sharing my screen, I can go to our, I could yes, I could find
That's
out.
fine.
Okay, I'll put it in chat, maybe, since we're running out of time, but I could let you know on that. Yeah, I didn't share that part of our statistics, but we actually do have regionally where the collection's being used. And a lot of it's New York State, which is not surprising because that's where Dr. Kramer is.
I think it's a fascinating glimpse, and it harkens back to some extent to what Karen Wolf referenced during her opening talk, which was the context that needs to go along with so much of what is in this collection in order to properly understand what this was and what it represented. I think the associated work for you as a project manager was probably quite challenging.
Yes.
You and I had spoken very briefly earlier today about what you were working with was frequently, notebook paper type flyers that would have been stapled to a telephone pole promoting the event. And I know in that slide you had with regard to the types of content, receipts was one of those things, and check stubs were one of those things that you had to capture. Is there a way for an individual searching this collection to hone in just on those very unique elements, whether it be a receipt or one of these Christmas cards, or
Yes. So all
how
those
has that
subject
been
terms,
enabled?
yeah, all those subject terms are in the repository. So one of the links I dropped in the chat are digital collections. When you open this collection, you'll see the facets on the left, and you can drill down. You can go receipts or clippings, bills. So when you open up that facets feature, you will see all the different subject headings that you can use to filter through the collection. Otherwise it's just this huge collection you're paging through.
Okay. And I think, well, let me ask you this. As project manager for this specific 3-year project, what were your biggest takeaways? What did you learn in managing this project that you think is something that you'll apply elsewhere?
The first thing that comes to mind is preservation. It was pretty shocking that it wasn't written in the grant, and the assumption was made the collection was ready to go, when, as you mentioned, the stuff was tacked on poles. You know, we had a whole session in how to remove staples from this preservation staff. Like, that's how many staples were in this thing. So my first takeaway is always talk to your preservation department when when you're going to write a grant like this. Never assume or take a faculty member's word that it's ready to go. And then just the number of people involved. I don't think anyone foresaw how many people were needed to get this done. I certainly have a acute knowledge of it now, and I try to express it anytime someone wants to write a new grant. Like, we need to get as many people involved in the front end talking before we get the money and discover we need another army of people to actually see it through. So yeah, those are the two things that come to mind.
And is there, when you think about the preservation aspect, and I admit I was laughing at when you referenced the number of staples that needed to be removed, because I can just imagine what that would have involved. But when you talk about preservation, and I know you mentioned at one point you made a passing reference to Mylar. What other types of preservation activities were really, talk a little bit more about what the preservation activities really required.
Yeah, so a lot of the photographs had issues, and we don't have anyone on staff with expertise in handling photographs, sure, but actually mending them, dealing with them, pulling negatives apart, the sort of stuff. So that's where the temp had to come in that we hired. She had photo expertise. So we had a lot of issues with photos being torn and things like this. And we wanted to make sure the vendor was getting, you know, the best flattened copy they could of whatever we were scanning. And so there was that. We had a lot of folded material and brittle newspaper. We deacidified all the clippings. So there was a lot of soaking and that sort of stuff going on. I mean, the care that went into this project is, to me, quite amazing. But there was that happened. And then, I mean, there was just so much that needed flattening, whether it be corners or just tape that was disintegrating, stuck on the edges, you know, because things were also, you know, taped up, not just tacked up. All of these sorts of things had to happen with the preservation.
Well, I think your perspective on this particular project is specifically very interesting, because this is the day-to-day type of wrestling that I think very few people on the outside understand the library may be going through. As Karen mentioned this morning, the need for researchers to understand what has to go into a project like this. You've illuminated, certainly for me, and I would think for a number of other people in our audience, how complex this is, how time consuming, and the type of long range planning that's required yes, it's difficult to write a grant, but then you have to actually execute on the grant as written. And what you did was really quite amazing. So kudos to you for that.
Thank you.
Well, and thank you so much for being with us here today.